This morning we will be reading two passages. The first one is from 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 to 11. And the second one is 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 to 5. So we'll start with the 1 Peter. The end of the world is coming soon. Therefore, be earnest and disciplined in your prayers. Most important of all, continue to show deep love for each other, for love covers a multitude of sins. Cheerfully share your home with those who need a meal or a place to stay. God has given each of you a gift from His great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well to serve one another. Do you have the gift of speaking? Then speak as though God Himself were speaking through you. Do you have the gift of helping others? Do it with all the strength and energy that God supplies. Then everything you do will bring glory to God through Jesus Christ. All glory and power to Him forever and ever. Amen. Now continuing with the 2 Corinthians. Now I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in His kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. They are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor. But they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. For I can testify that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more. And they did it of their own free will. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. They even did more than we had hoped, for their first action was to give themselves to the Lord and to us, just as God wanted them to do. Amen.
And Peter starts with an interesting reminder in this passage. He says, the end of all things is near. Now you might, like I might look at that and go, well, he missed that one, didn't he? And maybe he did. But maybe the point of Peter isn't so much that the end is near, that it's going to be in a few weeks or a few months. Maybe it's a reminder that this is important to focus your life. That there is enough time to do everything that you need to do, but there is not enough time that you can waste the time that you have. Do you see that? So there's enough time, but you need to focus your energy, your time on the things that you need to do. In the end, judgment will come. And the expectation that Paul and Peter and the early apostles had for the church is that these people would be, in the end, pure and blameless because they know the right thing to do, and they do it. That's what Philippians 1, 9 through 11 says. That's the purpose. That's the work of Peter and Paul and the apostles, is where people's love is overflowing more and more. And they have more insight into who God is, and that they're becoming pure and blameless because they know the right thing, and they do it. Not that they're perfect, but they are people who do the right thing at the right time in the right situation. And so how do we get there? We get there by getting some instruction, by bringing on board some of the things that we need to do to have that kind of life. In other words, how do we say thank you to God as we live in community with one another? And Peter gives us 4 things that he calls this church, and I think he would call us to do as well. The first is to be sober-minded. In other words, to be mentally alert, to be awake. Some of us are, by nature, thinking about different things, off in the clouds, thinking about yesterday, thinking about tomorrow, next week, next month. But Peter calls us to be focused on here and now, to be sober-minded. You know, you think about someone who's drunk or is high on something, you know, they're not really aware of all the stuff that's going on, and that, you know, but this is to kind of like move away from that, but focus and be aware of what's happening on around you, what's going on. And to do that so that you can pray. And prayer is one of those things that as we do it, And as we set aside maybe even our agenda when we pray, we can have an opportunity to receive God's agenda, to get God's perspective. You know, if we come to God with prayer, in prayer always with our list, then we're not really receiving God's agenda, are we? There's a great acronym about prayer that is called ACTS. It's adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication, asking. Do you notice what came last? The asking part. You know? So when we come to God, we want to come and we want to step back, and it gives a moment of clarity. The noise of this life can kind of come down. And we really need that, because our lives are noisy. There is a lot going on, a lot we have to do, a lot that we haven't done right. And coming and praying gives us a chance to be sober-minded, to relax, to remember God's in control of what's going on in this world. And we're just a part of it, and to say, Lord, what are you doing, and what's my part? What can I do? I can't do it all. You really can't do it all. What do you have me to do? To be sober-minded so that we can pray. The second thing he tells the church is the importance of love. That we would have love for one another and God's family in the church. And it's interesting, he talks about love in a really interesting way. He said, love makes sinful behaviors disappear. That's amazing. Love, when we have love, sinful behaviors disappear. And the reason is, when we have love, we're not thinking about ourselves. We're not thinking about what we get out of it. Love is always giving to others, isn't it? It's always thinking about what's best for them. And when we're thinking about what's best for them, then the likelihood of us sinning, of hurting, of harming someone else is really low. But when we think about us, which we do most of the time, we're going to hurt the other people around us. So how do you cover a multitude of sins? How do you make these things so they're not there anymore? You do it through love. Love is that core part. It is at the core, the central part of the Christian faith. You remember 1 Corinthians 13 is all about love, right? What will remain? Faith, hope, and love. Which is the greatest? Love. Again and again and again. And sometimes as Christians, we just kind of let the love thing kind of flow over us and say, that's nice, yeah. And we really should take time, and I'm speaking to myself with this, to take in the priority of love. To ask myself, to ask ourselves, where is love missing in my life? And why is it missing there? Why won't I love? Why can't I receive it? What's in the way? Because love eliminates selfishness. Love is so critical to our lives. It's what we need. It's self-sacrificing. God says, love one another. The greatest commandment, or the great commandment, love God, love each other. To the disciples, he said, love one another. I give you a new commandment, a new focus to love one another. We should talk about this all the time. But there's other things that Peter tells us here, so I'm going to move forward. But please don't let that one flow over you. Take time and ask, where's the love? And you can do that in a self-condemning way, and that won't help you at all. Or you can do that in a non-judgmental way and say, Lord, help me find that love again. Help me develop that love. Help me remember how loved I am. The third thing he tells the people, so he tells them first to be sober-minded so they can pray. He talks about the importance of love for one another, that they have that. And the third thing is that they have this essential nature of hospitality, this of giving something to someone else who needs it. And really the Christian faith spread primarily, one, because people were called to go to do that, take the message. But you know why it actually worked? Is because people opened up their homes. That, there was no Ibis Hotel, at that time. Just wasn't. There were a few inns here and there, but it was rather expensive. Most people couldn't afford that. And so if you were a Christian coming in, bringing the gospel, you would come into a city and you would ask, where can I stay? Who will open their home? Who will put a meal for me without any charge? And that was hospitality. It was essential to the spread of this faith, this truth about Jesus. Now, hospitality may look different now. I don't think for the most part we need to always open our homes up to traveling evangelists or someone taking the gospel from time to time. That is true. But hospitality can take lots of different forms. It can take forms in terms of kindness, in terms of caring. And hospitality is basically seeing the needs of others and opening yourself up to meet them, right? Doesn't have to be rocket science. And it will always inconvenience us a little bit, right? If someone comes and takes a seat at your table, you might be enriched, but you're also going to be a little inconvenienced. If someone stays in your home and sleeps there, you're always going to be a little bit inconvenienced. But we do it because God has been hospitable to us and has been giving to us. And so we turn around and give that to our fellow brothers and sisters. And it's really interesting that this one talks about hospitality must be without grumbling. I think it's a wonderful insertion that Peter put. Because when it's without grumbling, it's a true expression of love. When it's with grumbling, it's a true expression of selfishness, isn't it? You can do something nice for someone and then grumble about it. I sent an email to Julie about something I think it was yesterday, about something, and I grumbled, right? You know, and at least I said I grumbled, so, you know, I get that very little credit, you know. Like for a coffee, that's like 5 cents, you know, off the coffee price. But it was just a little thing, and I was kind of, you know, I didn't want to do it. But I said, I'll do it. So I grumbled. And thankfully, she didn't zing me back with an email, so thank you for that. But, you know, we by nature, we can say, I'll do it, but I'm going to grumble. And he says, when you do hospitality, when you're sharing with each other, don't grumble. Because you take away from it. And I grumbled because I was thinking about me. I was thinking about me. And when you grumble, you're thinking about you. Hospitality and love is about thinking about the other person. It's about passing on that sharing that God has made for us. And we all grumble, so let's join the club, right? But let's recognize what's going on when we grumble and say, you know, that's not the life God's called me to. He's called me to a different kind of life, a life of thankfulness and giving and sharing. And the fourth thing he says is he calls this church to be those that are spirit-empowered in their ministry for one another. That God has given them one or more ways to express his love by serving each other. And recognize that God has lots of different ways to do that. But he's giving you one or two or more specific ways that he is empowering you to do your thing in this world. That's amazing. It's not like you just have to go pick that up or you have to work to earn that. God, when you came to faith, gave it to you. And the Spirit makes it alive in you. And it's operative. You just have to discover what it is and lean into it. And God's going to do good things in the life of other people. And you're going to feel like, hey, I'm making a difference. By the grace of God, I am making a difference. And so he says, if it's speaking, let it be like the words of God coming out of your mouth. May it be edifying, direct. May it help people know where to go. May it correct people. May it equip them. And if it's serving, do it with the strength and the energy that God gives you to be able to serve these people. And in all of this, recognize the source of the gift, of the grace that God gives you. It's God. He gave you the ability to do this. And remember that he's the one who's there, and this is there to give him glory, so that the beauty and the greatness of God is revealed. Not that someone says, aren't you great? But hopefully they'll say, that's great. And somehow connect that to God. We're not in charge of that, what they do with what we do, but we're in charge of trying to make sure that we, as we serve one another, are pointing to God and to his greatness. In a sense, Peter says your role in these gifts is to be a good steward or a manager. God has given you something to use to serve. The question is, are you using it? Are you using it well? Are you using it often? You know? If you're managing something, aren't those the questions you start to ask? Is this effective or not? Is it helpful? Is it just energy going out? But we are managers of everything that God has given us. And the question is, are we good ones or not? God has given us this ability to love one another by serving each other, by being sober-minded and praying for one another, by offering hospitality to one another. And when we do that in love, that's self-reinforcing. When I do that for you in love, that changes you, right? And you're more likely to do it for someone else in love. But if I do it and you know and I know it's not in love, but I do it, that's self-reinforcing too, isn't it? Selfishness self-reinforces. And so there's what I would call spiritual momentum. Right? When we love, there's spiritual momentum pushing things forward. And when we don't, then there's spiritual momentum pushing things back. And we all experience it, and we've all felt it. And we all wish someone else would change the momentum. But it's not someone else's job to change the momentum. It's ours. And how do we do that? By taking a step back and remembering all the amazing blessings, how much God has shared with us, how thankful we are, and that our lives are 95% full. And so we've got lots to be able to give. There's not a scarcity here, except for in our heads. There's abundance. And when you start to share, things start to change. So I want to ask you today, where can you incorporate this in your life? I just want you to take a step back, and I want you to engage with these ideas. Where can you incorporate sober-mindedness and prayer? Is there a place that you kind of find that you get to, and you just get scattered? You just get pulled here and there. You thought of a place, didn't you? I want you to think about today, how can I be sober-minded in that space? What does it take for me to remember God's there? He got there before I got there. He'll be there after I leave there. And what does it mean for me to pray in that space for those people or those situations around me? Maybe you need to think about it in a little different way. Where can I love? You know, where can I love? You know, this is one of those easy questions to ask, and the answers are many. So many places where love is missing. But where can I show love? And this is primarily talking here to the body of Christ, the church, and so you want to think this context, this space, but it also goes outside of this. It would be terrible to keep all this love of God just in here. That would be a shame, because there's more than enough for here and out there. Where can I show hospitality? Who needs something that I can offer? It will cost me a little bit. Maybe think of a face or a person. Maybe it's a call. Maybe it's a note. Maybe it's an email without grumbling. Sorry. Where? And where can you give your spirit-driven service? See, because I don't just want to preach a message. I don't want to just give instruction. I want to see God-driven action in my life and your life. Because words, they're words. But when they take shape in our lives and move out into action, it changes things. It changes us. It changes other people. So what does this look like in real life? You know, when you see these types of things happening in a community, what does it look like? And in a wonderful way, 2 Corinthians 8 gives us a picture of that. And Tasker in his commentary says that 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9 is a Christian philosophy of giving. It's the best one in the Bible, and I think he's absolutely right. And so I want to challenge you to read these chapters and think about these chapters and develop a Christian philosophy of giving. A lot of us don't have one. You know, if we were to meet in the elevator, and I were to be bold enough, which won't happen, don't worry, to say, you know, what's your Christian philosophy of giving? What would you say? And if you're sorting through the files in your head, then it's not clear to you. That's okay, but don't stay there. But these two chapters have a Christian philosophy of giving that really helps us develop a personal conviction about what's true and habits about how to do it. But Paul here gives an example, a case study in a sense of what it looks like to be generous, what it looks like to be the kind of people that have taken on board being sober-minded, being filled with love, being hospitable and generous to others, and using the gifts that they have to be able to serve those around us. And so I want to give you the setting of this, a little bit of this chapter. Paul, the reality is that Jerusalem Christians, because of their faith and possibly because of a famine and other things, they have become extremely poor. And as an act of solidarity between the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians, of which there was, by the way, this very difficult trying to figure out how to live together, Paul said, I want to bring these two communities together. And the way I want to do it is there's a need here by the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. And if the Gentile Christians can help them, you see how that will solidify? See how that act of love will bring them together in ways that are helpful? And so that's his desire. And so Paul invites many of the Gentile churches to take up a financial offering to help the people in Jerusalem, the Christians in Jerusalem, through this. And he gave this rationale that the Gentiles owe their spiritual heritage to the Jews. So if you're a Gentile, and by the way, 99.8% of us probably in this community right now are Gentiles from our origin. We're not Jewish. We owe a great heritage to the Jews who walked with God and preserved the scriptures and passed it on to us. But it seems that Paul didn't ask the Macedonian churches. He didn't ask the churches of church in Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea, who we've talked about the last few weeks. And he probably didn't ask them because he felt that they were too poor. And he felt like they had gone through such great persecution against, we mentioned that just recently, because of their faith, that he just thought, they can't give. It's just not right to ask them. And so we get the sense as we read this that he didn't ask them. But, and this is a great but the Spirit of God was at work in these churches, and they begged Paul to participate more than once. Now, I have to tell you, I have never had someone come up to me in church and says, please, can I give more? You don't have to do that. I'm not asking for it. But I just want you to see how unusual this was. And these are people who are poor. They don't have much money. They're going through difficulty and through persecution, and yet they beg. And they have great enthusiasm in their generosity. And in the midst of poverty, they give the most, not in total. They don't give the largest amount of money, but by percentage of what they have, they give the largest amount. That's what I think. They gave more than anyone else by percentage of what they had because they gave abundantly and beyond what they really could even afford because of this joy within them. And Paul says most importantly, they gave out of allegiance to Christ. They gave themselves first, and this is important because we sometimes miss it because of the Lord. They gave to the Lord themselves to the Lord first. Lord isn't just the high guy up there in charge. It's the one to whom I give my allegiance. It was an act of allegiance they're giving. And they gave out of solidarity with their brothers and sisters in Christ. They gave themselves to the Lord, and the natural expression of that, you see, was to give themselves, give to other people. And that's a healthy way to generate and develop generosity. I want to give you just a few thoughts about this passage as in terms of what it tells us as a case study. And you can read it for yourself. I really encourage you to read 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 to develop a philosophy of giving, of being generous with the resources that God's given you. But the first thing that I want to give you from this passage is this. Is a generous heart that acts sacrificially to help others is achieved by the grace of God alone. It's a gift. Developing that generous heart is a gift that comes because we receive the gift of God. In other words, it's not obligation. It's not. And so often we make giving, church or other place, obligation. But it's really a realization of privilege. How privileged we are. How blessed we are. How much we've been given. So I can be generous and I can give to other people around us. See, that's what the people in Macedonia discovered. The grace of God made them generous people. The second thing is that Christian giving isn't considered great by the amount that you give, but by the sacrifice that is made in the giving. Do you remember Jesus tells the story about the woman who has 2 copper coins? Basically pretty worthless money, and she comes up to the temple and people are coming and they're giving. Some people are giving lots of money, some people are giving a little bit of money, and she comes with 2 coins, and Jesus says, do you see her? And of course, everybody was watching everybody give, because that's what they did. She said she gave more than everybody else. Because she didn't give out of her abundance. She gave out of her poverty. All that she had. Says that's generosity. That's faith. And that's the kind of person that God will bless. So I don't want you to go home and empty your bank account, okay? It's not the goal. Get the principle, right? Get the principle. Don't miss the principle in this. In that it's not about the amount, but it's about saying, Lord, how much can I give? Not how much do I have to give? And Lord, can I give out of a thankful heart? Or do I have to, am I grudging about my giving? Because if so, then there's some heart work to do so that you can really be free to give. And the last thing is that these Macedonians, they tapped into 2 grace gifts that God gave, that he offers to all people. And God offers to all people these grace gifts. He offers to them the grace of generosity and the grace of joy. The grace of generosity and the grace of joy. You know what? I think every one of you want to be joyful. You know, one of the ways to get there is to receive the grace of God, to realize how much you have, and in that joy, to start to give it away to those in need, to those within the community of the church, and to those outside. And watch what God does. I'm just going to finish with 2 quick things, 2 stories from my experience, my life. My dad passed away about 3 years ago, and I remember, I think it was the happiest day in his life that I saw. This was probably 10, 15 years ago. We were at the beach, and we were unloading the car in Virginia, and we were unloading for this vacation. Of course, our kids are small, and we have all this stuff, and my dad was just saying, this year has been a really great year in the market, in the stock market for me. And, I've been able to give, and he told me the amount, which kind of shocked me. I've been able to give this much to charity. And it was the happiest moment in his life, I think, or at least that I experienced. Now, my dad was a pretty happy guy most of the time. And that kind of shocked me. Well, part of me thought, hey, well, I could have used some of that too, to be honest. But my dad had discovered something that I hadn't yet discovered. The joy of giving. It sounds strange, doesn't it? You think, there's no joy in giving. It's because you haven't tried it. And you haven't done it the right way. But when you do it out of the right heart and the right motive, out of a thankful heart, oh my goodness, the privilege to be able to give produces joy. Test me. Well, better, test God. You're not sure? Develop the heart. See the need. Give joyful. Give out of the abundance. And you watch. You watch. It'll change your life. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't know this, but for the first 7 to 8 years of the life of All Nations Church, other people who will never be here, never see the church, never attend a service, never receive the blessing, gave about 600,000 to 700,000 euros for us to exist. How in the world, right? They didn't all give it at once. It happened over that period of time. Why would you do that? Because their hearts were transformed by the love of God. And they saw an opportunity. And the opportunity to bless people in this country in a place that they would never be and never see. And so they did it. I remember John Urban, who was the treasurer here now, who's now the treasurer of ICA, the organization that helped do this. And when we first brought this up, he says, nobody gives something for nothing. I said, well, these guys are gonna. And you know what he told me later on? I didn't believe it, but it was true. You know the only people crazy enough to do that? Christians. Christians are crazy. In such a good way. God invites us to be that kind of people. because we've experienced God's grace, and it starts to transform our heart, and therefore we can give joyfully and generously, even if we don't have a lot. Why do I tell you this today? I want to stir you up. I want to stir you up to be people who share. I want to be part of a congregation. I want to be a person who shares more and more of what I have because I have been given so much, and I want you to join me. I want us to join Christ because that's what he did for us. And I don't want you to miss out on the joy of generosity, because that's a sad way to live. And I want to tell you that that grace is right there. It's so close to you, you can smell it. The grace to make that move and make that change. But you're going to have to decide, like every decision, am I going to step into that truth? Or I'm going to stay where it's safe? Paul said to the Corinthian church, don't miss the opportunity, guys. Look at the Macedonians. That's the way to live. And that's the way to live.